Poland Defiant, the German invasion, September 1939. And I know most of you, when they hear about that theme in wargaming, they want to start singing Springtime for Hitler. I totally understand the sentiment because that song is just so catchy. But this is not the point. The point is that here we have a two-player wargame by Revolution Games. It's a folio game, so it comes in a plastic Ziploc bag. It's a two-player game, but can also be played solo by a single player controlling both sides at the best of their capabilities, and it works very well in that fashion because there is no hidden information. And it's a chit pool game. That means that groups of units will activate randomly based on the random draw of activation chits from a cup, which is a mechanic that I adore. You know, that's one of my favorite mechanics in wargaming, so I was very, very pleased with that. It is also a very simple game by the standards of wargaming, I mean, because it has only a couple of pages of rules, so definitely a good beginner war game. On top of that, it is based on the same system that you may be familiar with if you played the Königsberg game that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. So in any case, it's gonna be easy to learn, especially more so if you play the Königsberg game. Now, let me show how the game works more in detail. This is the map of the game. It is printed on paper, but it lays flat pretty well on the table. At least I did not need to use a piece of plexiglass. What you see here is the mainly open terrain of Poland, which will make things pretty challenging for the defender. Not many forests, and by the way, most of the forests are placed where the Polish player really will not be able to take advantage of them. Some swamps here, but other than that, it is open terrain, and we know that is precisely one of the challenges that the defenders had to face. A little bit of water here, and there will be a German game piece that can move around here and lend support on the coast. So the German player will have a small contingent of Slovak forces that will come from there, but most of their attacks will come from this area here and here and here. This is where the German player will place their game pieces at setup. Three-prong attack, and the Polish player sets up in the middle of the board, and we will have to try to slow down the German advance as much as possible. The big prize here is Warsaw. If the German player controls Warsaw in supply, the German player wins the game. So the Polish player has to prevent that from happening. If that doesn't happen by the end of the game, then you count victory points, which are based on control of key cities on the map, and that determines who the winner is. So the German player needs to take possibly Warsaw, or at least as many cities as possible, and the Polish player needs to prevent that from happening. Now, this is a chit pull game, so players will pull chits from a cup to activate units or groups of units, but the number of chits that you get changes from turn to turn. Here on the turn track, you have the number of chits that each side gets to draw. So you draw randomly and you simply stop activating chits that you draw from the player that has reached their maximum. Suppose we're in turn 3, no matter how many combat or many headquarter or activation chits are in the cup, after the German player has activated 5 groups, they will stop activating, and after the Polish player has activated 4, they will stop activating. So as you can see, this is a really simple, such a streamlined way of representing the ebbs and flow of the battle, the shock of the Polish forces. As the second day they only get 3 activations, and then they kind of rally a little bit, and things keep changing as the campaign goes. So because of the chit pull mechanism, not only do you not know the order in which your forces will activate, but also you don't know which ones will activate, because in some turns you will not be able to activate all of your forces. What else you get with the game? You get a very well done rulebook, a player aid, chits, of course, activation chits, game pieces. What you have to add, or what you may want to add, is, well, what is not included is the counter trade that you see there, the dice, and the Chobani Cup to use as a randomizer. By the way, you know that you're into wargaming and in particular into chit pool games when you have actually tried many brands of yogurt just to see which cups make the best randomizers, and you've come to the conclusion that Chobani makes the best randomizers for wargaming. Somebody should let them know and maybe give them a prize. But of course, what's also very important for us is the game pieces representing military units. Now, let's move to the map and talk about the rules of the game. By the way, very simple idea. If you have played the Königsberg game by Revolution Games that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago, then you know how to play this game. Basically, there are very few rules that are different. There are air units. That's it. You have air units, and that's the main difference. So if you play that game, what are you still doing here? Just go to the conclusions, because what you're gonna see is very similar to what you play or what you saw in my previous video. But if you want a review session, or you just like to listen to my mellifluous voice, then by all means, feel free to stay around. So we have military units, we have headquarters, and the numbers you see on the headquarters are range and movement points. And then we have military units that have 3 numbers printed on them. Well, of course, you have a symbol that identifies the type of unit, from cavalry, infantry, etc., etc. And the numbers here are attack factor, defense factor, and movement. Units on the map, and you will want units of a certain group, and the group is indicated by the color bar at the bottom, to be around their headquarters, because they need to be in command to be able to activate it, to do all of the fancy stuff that you want them to do. And the same, of course, applies to the German players. So we're going to put a couple of chits here just to get a sense. Now, a turn starts with the air unit phase. The German player only has air units, and there are 2 types. The ones that can be used for interdiction, and the one that can be used for ground attacks. So the German player can use their military units, and the ground attacks, well, they're just what it sounds like. You perform ground attacks. For interdiction, you place them on the map, and then they will simply slow down movement to all units, including friendly units, that move into, through, or out of those hexes. Another important thing is that when you use air units, they may get damaged, and so it may take longer for the game unit to get back to the board. After the air unit phase, you have the reinforcement phase, in which players may get new forces, and then we get to the command phase, which really is the heart of the game. That is when players will draw activation chits from this cup and will activate their corresponding headquarters, again, up to the limit indicated on the map. So, for example, the German player or anybody draws this chit, then the German player can activate that group there. What is the odd? What are the odds? It's exactly the one that was on the map. An important thing about activation chits, however, the German player has a schedule printed on the map. Basically, the German player needs to control a certain number of victory points. Say it would be 2 in turn 3 and 3 in turn 5 to be able to act at full strength. If the German player does not control enough victory points, does not respect that operational pace indicated on the turn track, then there is a penalty. The German player loses an activation. So that's very important, because it really keeps things moving. The German player has to work hard to make sure that the schedule is respected. That's why also air-ground units that perform attack, especially against small units that may be destroyed by that attack, is very important, because then you can concentrate on land forces into steamrolling over the remaining Polish units. You really have to coordinate, to do combined armies, to coordinate air attacks and ground attacks, and to have your mechanized groups work together with the infantry. Also, as you can see, some units do not belong to a specific group. They don't have that band. They can be activated by any headquarter. So you draw the chit, you activate those units of that group. Units that are activated can move and then attack. When you move up to your full movement allowance. The cost of movement is based on terrain, like terrain in the hex or on the edges of the axis. You have railroads. As you can see here, some units have railroad movement and they have infinite movement as long as they stay on railroads and don't bump into enemy units. Then you have strategic movement that can be done only along roads as long as you don't exit or enter enemy zones of control. Speaking of those, most units will project the zone of control in the 6-axis surrounding them, and you have to spend an extra movement point to enter or exit a zone of control. +3 if you're moving from one zone of control to another zone of control directly. After the active player has moved any and all, or none if they so desire, of the units in the activated group, then units in that group can perform combat, which is just a classic style. Let's look at the combat result table. If you play war games, it's what you think it is. It is a classic combat result table. So you will, units of the activated group can attack adjacent enemies. You will total the attack strength of the attacker, divide that by the defense strength of the defenders, turn that into a ratio 2:1, 3:1, 1:1. That will tell you the column that you're using. And then, well, roll a die. Of course, there may be modifiers here, but in general, you will get to a column, roll a die, and cross-reference the column that you're using with the die roll. And D means that that result applies to the defender, A to the attacker. Results may be step losses if you see a number, and maybe retreats by a number of X's if you see an R. After combat, the attacker may advance into a target axis that were vacated, either because the target units were destroyed or because they retreated. There are some rules about which units had to take the first damage and if units can convert retreats into step losses into retreat. But generally speaking, it's pretty simple. After that, we have the supply phase. Units need to demonstrate they can trace a supply line to a supply source. Supply sources are on the edge of the board, otherwise they get out of supply, in which case their attack strength is halved. If after they've been out of supply, they still are on supply next turn, they become isolated with steeper penalties. And then at the end, you have a couple of other functions, some cleanup and some other upkeeping to do at the end of the turn. But this is basically the general idea, and this is the procedure that you repeat turn after turn, which is air unit phase, reinforcement, command phase by activating groups randomly up to the number of activations allowed that turn, and continue like this until the end of the game. Well, I like Chitpool Games, and I like Games by Revolution Games, the publisher of this game too, and this is no exception. This is just a good, fun game. It's one of those games that makes me long for the good old days SPI when we had such games that felt historical, but they only had 4, 5, 6, 8 pages of rules. It really makes you wonder, do we need a lot more than that? Do we need a lot more than activating headquarters, move, attack, and then a couple of surrounding rules that will give historical flavor? Then, of course, the map itself gives historical flavor, because if you're playing in Poland or if you're playing in the Ardennes or in Normandy, those are different games, even if the basic core of rules is very similar. So this is a game with a classic feel to it, back in the day where people wanted to jump into the historical situation and have a good confrontation without having to go through a lot of fiddly rules. And I say that this is a classic nostalgic game in the best possible sense, because I don't know, as I grow old and gray in the pursuit of my hobby, I more and more appreciate light games that I can play without needing to take a 2-week vacation to learn them. So it's easy to learn, you jump into the situation, and because of the different forces in play, the activation schedule, because of the map, it feels historical. It feels like you're really getting a good sense of the historical event, and you have the interesting challenges that the historical counterparts were facing. And I also like how the game, well, the Polish will lose the battle, but the Polish player doesn't have to lose the game. I like that a lot because, well, you have a lot of situations in history that were not balanced, and you can still have balanced games based on that, just simply by tweaking the victory conditions, or like you have here, giving the German player a schedule, which, if not respected, will give the Polish player an advantage. And so sometimes the German player is doing things that are not optimal simply to avoid losing that activation, because not activating a full army can be pretty, well, it can be a pretty big disadvantage, which also means when the Polish player is gonna start having limited activations, that is tough too. So all of these elements in the design, in a certain sense, they are hardwired in the design. You don't have to worry about remembering 50 pages of rules. The game pieces will force you to play historically because you have a lot of strength or not a lot of strength. The schedule will force the action to go in certain directions, but in certain directions that do not feel scripted. Because as the German player, yes, you have to that schedule that you want to respect, but you do not have to do it always the same way. But you have to score those points by controlling cities, and sometimes you're pushing from Königsberg, sometimes you're pushing in one direction or another. Since any of those possible cities that you might take control will allow you to respect the operational schedule, then there are a lot of different ways in which the operation can be performed. So I like that. I like a game that hardwired a lot of history, so you don't have to worry about the rules, and you can really think about the strategy, really enjoy the experience, and yet at the same time the action tends to fall along historical lines, and yet at the same time not to feel scripted. That is a balance that is hard to obtain in wargaming, and I think that they were able to do it here. There's a game that is very satisfying to play. It has history, it has interesting challenges for both sides, it has plenty of surprises, a lot of things to worry about, but mainly you worry about gameplay, not so much about the rules, which is something that I really appreciate. Poland Defiant, another really successful game by Revolution Games. I hope at this point to see more games in the system, because, well, it's a system that I know how to play. I read a lot of rule books constantly. Sometimes I feel like that's all I do. So if now there are games that I can play without having to worry too much about the rules, and I jump into history thanks to those simple rules, and I jump into a fun game, to me that's ideal. So please, Revolution, give us more World War II games based on the same system, because I will play them and chances are I'll enjoy them. I definitely know that I enjoyed Poland Defiant.